We want an exposure to a market or an
Everything they need in one place.
Be the world's foremost authority on
Individuals, advisors and institutions.
Hello and welcome to the Morningstar series Future-Proof. I'm joined today by Tony Mewd of St James's Place, and we're going to be talking about retirement planning, but specifically planning for long-term care. Tony, thanks for joining me.
You're welcome.
So what is perhaps the risk of kind of not considering that you may need long-term care in the future? Because of course, we don't like thinking of death and we don't like thinking about the fact that we may become ill and need sort of palliative care, but it is something that's very costly. So if you're not thinking of these things, what are the risks?
Well, I think the reality is that we have to accept that if you just look at the stats, people are living longer, not necessarily healthier. 1 in 3 females, 1 in 4 males will receive or need some form of care during their lifetime. We already know that even in the current generation, 1 in 5 people will see 100, which is, a significant change. So the issue of care in some ways is not that different to any other potential need for capital in your later life. The difference is that if you don't save, or if you don't at least think about these considerable costs of care, then the reality is you might not get what you need. And it might not be politically correct to say so, but if you are ultimately reliant on local authority, state aid, which ironically we've still got probably 50% of people think that the state should pay, then the quality of care may not be what you actually require or need. The average length of time in a local authority home is actually just under 2 years. If you compare that with, if you like, self-funded homes, it's in excess of 4 years. It doesn't take a genius to work out what the reasons for that might be.
And is there a way that you can sort of give us a ballpark figure or a range as to what that kind of long-term care may actually cost? What do people need to be thinking about?
Right, the costs vary hugely, and they also vary depending on whether you're talking about residential care, nursing care or domiciliary care. Domiciliary care is care in your own home, which actually most people think that they will want. Ironically, a lot of people think that their children will look after them. On average, in our experience, is about 1 in 4 people think that their children will look after them. You get very different results when you ask the children. But the average cost of residential care in the UK is around £28,000 per annum. The average cost of nursing care is more expensive. It's around £38,000. Domiciliary care is much more difficult because domiciliary care on a 24/7 basis can be exceptionally expensive. If you think about it, if someone needs that level of care and they want it in their own home, you're looking at 3 carers permanently, and the costs there can be extreme. In practice, most people that receive domiciliary care probably only need someone coming in for 4 or 5 hours a day. So again, that's probably comparable with nursing care costs.
So if we just take an example of somebody who thinks that perhaps when they get to age 75, there's a good chance that they may need to spend the last few years of their life in a nursing home, perhaps their life expectancy is around about 80, you're looking at potentially £150,000 for a 5-year stay in a nursing home or even more. So that's a really substantial chunk that you need to be saving for.
Oh yes, you could comfortably spend 150, 200, £250,000 without frankly batting an eyelid. So yes, it is a lot. I would counter that by saying, and I wouldn't in any way deviate from the need to at least think about it. But again, if you look at sort of 65-year-olds, 65% of those actually have their own home unencumbered. Now, if they're prepared to use the value of that home, especially here in London, frankly, they can afford whatever level of care that they want. It does mean that they won't then be able to pass on their homes to their children, but that is at least a choice. So anyone, frankly, looking at this video, worrying about it, if they have their own home, then even if you've got a couple, they almost certainly will be able to pay and afford their own level of whatever level of care they want. That being said, it is absolutely essential that they get advice. Now, you may say, well, you would say that working for a wealth management company, but if you run out of money, then that is much more than just a financial issue for most people. If you take the time and trouble to find the right home that suits you, that actually is near your relatives, your children, that is maybe sort of is on the ground floor overlooking a nice garden, that is your room and gets the particular care that you've identified, you compare that with a home where actually is being supplied, is maybe not on the first floor, not near your relatives, actually sharing with 3 people you've never met before. That's a significant event for someone who is old and infirm, and frankly that has a very detrimental effect on their health. So actually getting advice to make sure you don't run out of money is actually essential, and that comes down to not only the way you save and the amount that you've accumulated, whether or not it's your house or something else, but also what you do with that money in order to, if you like, strip it out to take an income from it in order to pay the care fees.
So what are some of the sort of most commonly utilised products or strategies for making sure that you do have those assets available if you do want to go down the approach of generating an income?
Well, one of the things quite often people do is that they will say, oh, what I'll do is I'm not going to live in my house anymore because I'm going into a care home, so I'll rent my house out. That is rarely a good choice. Frankly, the problem with that is that even in London, the yields you'll get, if you get 6-7%, you're doing really well. There are going to be periods where you've got no tenant. There's going to be a tax liability on those yields, and of course the recent budget changed some of the dynamics around that.
Of course, if you're suffering from dementia or Alzheimer's or any other of the very common illnesses in later life, that managing rental of a property is going to be very difficult as well.
It is going to be very difficult, and actually 44% of people going into care unfortunately do have some form of dementia. Now the reality is a lot of people who go into care end up doing so with a power of attorney, so that it's their children who are organising that for them. So quite often it's the children who are making those sort of choices. But getting back to your question, probably one of the most underused types of investment, if I can use that word, is something called an immediate needs annuity. An immediate needs annuity, although it's got the term annuity in it, it's not like a traditional annuity. It's not based on sort of interest rates, which we know are currently at a historic low. This is a contract that will basically pay a set amount. Realistically, it can't pay more than the total amount of fees that you're due to pay, but it pays very high levels of return, and they're tax-free. Now the reason why it pays high levels of return, by which I mean anything from sort of 20 to 25, 26%, is that of course when someone goes into care they have a fairly low expectation of longevity of life. Now the value of an immediate needs annuity is not necessarily the return, it's the guarantee that however long you live, your fees will be paid. There is a certainty there that once someone has chosen the home that is right for them and gives them the care that they need, that they don't have to worry. And the average cost of an immediate needs annuity is currently around somewhere between sort of 120 to 120,000 pounds. Because what you're looking to do with one of these contracts is to identify what we call the shortfall. So this is the difference between the care fees are, let's say, £30,000. There will be maybe some state pension, you maybe have a private pension, you maybe have a little bit of income, and actually once you've identified that, you say, oh, okay, I've got £12,000 worth of income from those sources, the costs of my care fees are £30,000, I'd like a bit of extra. Right, okay, so what the shortfall is £19,000. On average, it's not going to cost £100,000 for most people, and they have the luxury of knowing that they are then guaranteed to cover their care costs.
Which is very reassuring, so it's good to have that kind of tangible amount that you can potentially build into your investment plan.
It's not the only option. You could just use conventional investments, you can use ISAs, you can use unit trusts, or any number of form of collectives, but that doesn't give you the reassurance. The advantage that it does have is, of course, that if someone was to buy an immediate need annuity and they were to die after, let's say, a couple of years, then actually they would have lost money, or more particularly, their beneficiaries would have lost the ability to maybe have that money passed to them. Under those circumstances, if that is a real concern, and it is important that that's a family decision, then they can go into more what I would call traditional investments.
Well, Tony, thanks very much. Some really practical advice for us there. Thank you for joining me.
Okay, thank you.
For Morning Star, I'm Holly Cook. Thanks for watching.